Welcome back. So this is episode 3 of Hiraeth Gaming's vlog on board game design. Today we're going to be talking about combat, kind of the inspiration for our game, some of the iterative processes that we've gone through, things we've changed, things that didn't work.
Yeah, because it's changed a whole lot since we started. I mean, over a few different iterations.
Yeah,
sure.
Some big ones. So the big topics today that we're kind of going through are the resource system, sort of the monster AI, monster mechanics that we're using, and then sort of the movement and the way that we kind of got around some of the problems with movement that we ran into.
Yeah.
So you want to start us off with
let's do it. So we originally had looked at a couple different games. We had games like Descent, Gloomhaven, D&D, Empire Assault, Imperial Assault. And those were kind of the main ones we were looking at because they've done combat a lot. They do it well in their own different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But you always want to be unique. You want to try and build on that.
Sure.
We didn't want to go too far off because it's a lot easier to teach somebody something they're familiar with. So we kind of originally stuck to a little bit tighter on those systems.
There's a couple things that maybe help as we kind of go through this. A couple of things we were trying to keep in mind. We wanted players to feel unique. So we wanted if we were going to have a tank DPS, buff healing system, we wanted this person to feel very different from this person to feel very different from this person. I think Gloomhaven probably does that best right now. There's a couple others that do that fairly well. And then the other thing was we wanted to shift away from like lots of mobs that you're fighting,
right,
and more into like big boss battles, or more kind of inspired by like Monster Hunter or some of the big Dark Souls fights, those kinds of games.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we started off with a system called Effort, which was basically it worked kind of like Descent's stamina system, where you can spend X amount of effort to add to a movement to your attack. It was very universal, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
It was very thematic. You're putting more effort into something, so you're doing more of it, which was, it was good, but it eventually devolved into gameplay where you would rest for a whole turn, and then you just dump all of your effort, and you'd rest and you dump every single time, and which was very boring.
Yeah, the problem you could kind of, because we were using a D10 system where you had to get your AP had to get high enough to be able to overcome their defense. You would basically just put enough effort in there to boost your AP to guarantee the hit, and then you would rest.
Yeah, because you'd be out of effort at that point. Yeah. So then you have to rest to get your effort back, and then go through it again.
Yeah, and I mean we probably could have pushed and fought to flesh that out more, but I think we found that it was a little too simplistic, and just we didn't really like that style of I'm not doing anything. We didn't feel like it was very real. Like I'm not doing anything, and no, I'm not. Now I'm going really big, and now I'm like catching my breath, and it didn't feel very fast paced.
Yeah, the strategy was pretty low. You knew what you were gonna do.
Yeah.
And it was there wasn't a whole lot of decision making, which we kind of want there.
Yeah, definitely.
So we went the other way with decision making.
Yeah.
And we had this system where you had 4 different resources. Mm-hmm. Each ability generated X number of them. Maybe you got 1 blue, 1 red.
Sure.
But they also cost something. So your basic stuff generated. So you would use abilities, get resources, and then use a different ability that costed something else. So it would kind of change.
Yeah, we had 4 different resources that were like different colors. We had like yellow, blue. We just used Pandemic's cubes. So we had yellow, red, blue, black.
Little cubes here.
And then we would take those, and it's like, all right, I'm gonna have this red attack that's gonna give me a couple blue, and then there's the blue one lets me heal, and then the yellow lets me dash, and then you'd have combinations of things that would let me attack and move a little bit, and that would cost a yellow and a red, and it was fun. It was fun. It was puzzly.
It was very puzzly. It was fun for a while, but it did get kind of clunky.
Yeah.
And it was really slow. It really slowed the game down.
It did. Yeah.
And our game is huge. We have 3 different phases, and combat is a third of our game. It's not it's not the entirety like Gloomhaven where you're playing the whole thing. You spend an hour and a half in Gloomhaven, you're fighting the whole time.
Right.
That's fine.
Yeah, with maybe 15 minutes in the city and leveling up your characters and stuff.
But we have to balance that. We had to bring that time down for the combat.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to adjust our system to get rid of that.
Yeah, and it was hard to balance. It was
Yeah, because you had different abilities were generating a different amount in different colors. Some colors were stronger than others. It was too much.
Because we were trying to make it thematic, but it was like, well, I always want to attack and I always want to move.
Yeah.
But so anyway, yeah, I think we were trying to maybe put a square peg into a round hole there.
Yeah.
And we just realized like, okay, time is this is way too long. We got to find something to change it up a little bit.
Yeah. And with that, we had these big maps. We had think Gloomhaven, where you have stuff you're placing down, traps, walls, obstacles, all the other stuff. We had those big maps. It was a 20 by 20 maybe.
Yeah. So Kingdom Death Monster is probably the closest thing that we had there. Kingdom Death Monster, I think, is like if I don't remember correctly, 18 by 16 or something like that.
Huge.
Yeah, it is huge. And then there's good things to that. It's just hard to make something streamlined and feel. It's hard to make movement feel intentional and strategic in the midst of this huge map, because it's always like, I want to go move next to the monster and kill it.
Yeah, and you'd also have turns where you're just moving, or the monster just moving, because you start off and you're looking at the monster from halfway across the map, and that's just extra time. That's 10 minutes and nothing happened. 10 actual minutes of gameplay, and it's just we couldn't do that.
So we're trying to make it thematic, and so we'd have like different setups where this one's at a waterfall and a river, and this one has like different stones around it, and it was going to be a lot of pieces, and we were already trying to think of how can we know our game is huge, so how can we trim this down? How can we trim this down?
Yeah.
And that was one of the first things I think we sort of agreed on, like, what if we just completely change the way that we do movement, the way that we do monsters, and that sort of thing. Yeah. So that brings us to our current system.
Yeah.
And explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So we have a very small map. It's currently, what is it? It's a 4 by
7.
4 by 7, I think.
Yeah.
So the monster doesn't move anymore. One thing that we found with players when we play tested is it took them very long to figure out specifically where to move the monster and how like where directly they should go, which person they should attack, stuff like that. Because when you have that big map and the monster's moving around, somebody has to control that, right? There's no computer system to control what this guy's doing.
AI is always a problem in board games. You're gonna have to solve and figure that out.
Yeah. And
so we were just like, man, what if we just completely get rid of monster movement except for the way that he affects the players?
Right. So basically now he doesn't move. He has his abilities, and since we know that the board isn't moving, we can specifically say where he's attacking. He can make area of effect attacks in certain zones of the map. So we can kind of direct a story with how the fight's going. Mm-hmm. He charges in, and everybody moves to the back row. So it seems like the monster's moving because all the players have moved behind him now, but he really hasn't moved anywhere. You didn't actually ever have to worry about his movement, but he still moved your characters around. So it still feels thematic. It still feels like things are happening. But you don't have to deal with the clunkiness because it just says move everybody to the back row. All right, well, we can move everyone.
Yeah, part of this is moving away from wargaming and like the high strategy sort of tactical, hey, I'm going to hide behind this thing. Like, we've completely gotten rid of line of sight. And I hate
amazing.
line of sight. Yeah. I hate it so much. I know that Descent and then second edition Descent and then Imperial Assault have gotten better and better, but I love it so much more that line of sight is not in the mix. There's still ranged weapons. There's still weapons with like spears with longer range, and bows and such. But being able to get rid of that has just, again, simplified it so much. We brought our game from what was an hour and a half to 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah. Some of the longer fights will probably take an hour, but by that time, that's a big boss fight would be that long.
And we want those to be very satisfying, where there's higher strategy, more on the line. That kind of thing. So I think the other thing, so regarding our combat, we have a new system that's a time-based system. And there are some other games, looking on Board Game Geek, there are some other games that have time-based systems. I've never seen a combat, but there could be something out there. Feel free to put it in the combat or in the comments. Yeah. But basically what we're doing is you have certain abilities, base abilities and then trained abilities that you'll get later on. The base abilities are things like attack and move and heal, that sort of thing. And they cost a certain amount of time. So you have kind of a clock that you have your little person represented on the clock, and that whenever you use an ability, then you go that much on the clock. And so then you don't go again until the clock catches back up to you. And so that means there's a little bit of strategy then in like, well, the monster's going to go in 4 time, but I have an ability. I could either do something at 4 time, or I could do something at 3 and then go again before the monster goes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of strategy in there where you can get extra turns, or you can line up different buffs with other players. Cause you can see, well, okay, they're going to go 2 times before my buff even runs out, so they can get the most effect out of it. Yeah. So there's a lot of strategy with just figuring out whose turn it's actually going to be. Mm-hmm. But there isn't really complexity to that, because you just go whoever's in the back. If you're tied with a monster, he goes. Otherwise, the players can choose.
Sure.
So it's really simple. We keep all of our abilities on the board as well. So if you have an ability, it would go on that board. If it's a 3 cooldown, it would go.
Yeah. We also have cooldowns.
Right.
So basically, cooldown, for those who don't play World of Warcraft or other video games, cooldowns are this idea of, hey, I've got this ability and I can't use it for an X amount of time. It's like typically that's used for like really strong abilities. So an ability might have I can't use it for 4 turns. So it takes takes me 3 times to be able to use it, and then I can't use it again for another 4 times. So I have to do other stuff in between there.
Right. So there's really, you got to figure out what you can use there, and it's all tracked on that board. So you put your player 3 times ahead, and then you slip your card four spaces ahead on the time track, and then whenever that clock catches back up to that cooldown ability, you bring it back to your hand, and then you have it available. So you can't use it. Basically tracks itself. You can't use anything that isn't in your hand, and so it goes on the board, and you don't have to really keep track of anything like that, which is nice.
And that's the thing, we're trying to create something that's strategic and big, and when you have things like buffs and you have things like debuffs that the monster is doing, it can get very fiddly very quick.
Tracking so many things.
One game that we both really love is Sentinels of Multiverse, but it's notorious for being very fiddly.
Right.
Where you have sometimes 10, 15 things that you're tracking of different monster things, and this does +1 and this one does -2, and the clock system I think is pretty elegant.
Yeah.
And it really solves a lot of the issues. It keeps track of your abilities for you. It keeps track of your buffs for you. It keeps track of monster debuffs, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That solved a lot of the issues for us.
Right. One thing that we haven't talked about is the priority system that we used to have. So when we first started with creating monsters and stuff like that, using their AI to decide who they would attack, we had a priority system of who dealt damage or healed or had the lowest health or something like that. So there was like a priority of who would get hit, and that was also very confusing for when we play tested it. It took them a very long time to figure out who actually was supposed to be attacked. So we ended up getting rid of that and kind of went to a threat-based system where if any of y'all played RPGs or WoW or anything like that, it basically, whenever you use something, whenever you deal damage, you're going to generate more threats. So we have a threat meter on our board where you can basically see, okay, who is in front. Whoever's in front is going to be attacked by whatever ability is next on the player or the AI card.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of just streamlines everything into not having to think about what it could be. It's just you look on the board, you decide who, whoever's in first, they're the person you're going to attack. Mm-hmm. So it just makes it, takes all those decisions out.
Yeah, and I think what happened basically as an effect, we moved away from like, okay, obviously you want to make things streamlined and elegant and smooth. And so the problem was whenever a monster, it was like, okay, here's the monster's going to attack. So we kind of have to say, okay, who did the most damage? Oh, well, I have a thing here that does, and this instead, it's just, I look and I say, oh, he's the highest. And it does add another little step whenever you go, but it kind of, because it's all in a line, you say, okay, I'm going to move my time. I'm going to move my, I'm going to put my ability on the clock if I have to do that. And I'm going to move my threat. And I do that every time. And it gets pretty easy rather than slowing down whenever the monster goes, which it's already the monster's turn. Nobody wants to do the monster's turn because we want to play our characters.
Right.
So
some people may enjoy doing the monster.
Sure, and they can play D&D or whatever. One thing that hasn't changed is we've actually not moved away from a D10 system.
Yeah.
I think that we like the D10 and that there's obviously more variance than a D6.
Right.
Not as much as a D20.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, that's one thing that's really been difficult as far as balancing, is trying to make sure that there's enough variance but not too much randomness. Where variance is basically you're not really having a huge disparity between your numbers, so it doesn't feel very swingy. If you have, like with D&D, you have a D20, so that's a huge number system where you can roll a 1 or you can roll a 18, and that's, it's just really hard to balance a system like that where you have these huge turns, where we only have, like, at this point, like 10 defense on a player.
Yeah.
So if you had those huge numbers, you just have to inflate everything so much.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it, is trying to keep the math as small as possible.
Yeah.
Math is not the most fun part of board games, and I know some people love to roll a lot of dice, but we're fighting with everything we can to keep numbers small, to keep increments of progression relatively small, so that it never. The goal is to feel like, hey, I can influence this map more than the randomness can.
Yeah.
That based on my strategy, I can either increase the number of attacks that are effective, or I can attack different areas that are vulnerable. Or so one thing we mentioned before is we want these really epic boss fights. Yeah. And so we met through World of Warcraft. Mm-hmm. I've always been much more interested in 30-minute like single boss, like let's kill the dragon. This is a struggle, like our health goes low and then we get back up. Where compared to like, I'm slaughtering a bunch of zombies or something. That to me has never felt as satisfying. And so I think we wanted to move towards a boss fight that was big and long. But part of the problem is it's like, okay, if I'm going to choose to attack this here every time, that is less exciting. Like, why am I ever moving? And rather than getting into tactics of like, oh, well, if you're flanking and if you have this guy, that was a little bit too much or beyond the scope of our game. So instead we went with hit locations. And so if you're fighting a wolf per se, then you might have, the head of the wolf, the sides or the flanks of the wolf, and then the tail of the wolf or the legs. And that gave us opportunity to say, hey, these things have different defense bonuses. Mm-hmm. These things have different effects. If you're standing behind them, it might affect you or hurt you in some way. Yeah. And then one of the cool things as well that you'll see eventually is this idea of whenever you do enough damage to a hit location, you can actually hurt the monster in that way.
Right. It's going to change how the fight's going. So we've said this before, a big part of our game is discovery. So we want these monsters to be, discovered as you're fighting them. You're going to fight these 2 or 3 times, maybe more. And each of those fights, we want to feel a little bit different because you're, maybe in the first fight you destroyed his flank and you found out a new thing about that monster.
Good or bad.
Good or bad, yeah.
But you'll know that forever more now.
Right. So then in later fights, you can either go back there if it was good, or you can avoid that and fight him somewhere else. And it may even change how his combat works.
And the cool thing too there is that we can integrate that with our resource system, because our resource system is directly based on you kill the monster, you get these resources, but some of them, again, this kind of, you throw it back to Monster Hunter. It's like you cut off the tail. If you can strategize that without dying, then the cool thing about that is as you get better at fighting, as you get stronger, you can be getting more resources. So it's taking you less time to do the same thing.
Yeah. And that was very, very much inspired by like playing Monster Hunter and having that kind of feel.
Dauntless.
Yeah, Dauntless. Yeah, we definitely like those kind of games, and that was kind of how we wanted to feel those fights to go, because we got away from the mob system where you're fighting a bunch of guys. Yeah. You're fighting one person. We wanted to feel epic. We wanted to feel big, and I think those games do it pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, anything else you can think of regarding combat?
I don't think so.
Cool. If you have any questions regarding our combat system, regarding our game in general, feel free to say, hey, please talk about playtesting, or please talk about your settlement system. We'll get there on those things, but let us know, and maybe we can prioritize that more easily. But otherwise, till next time, we'll see you later.
Thank you.